Hey y'all, and welcome back to another fun-filled Live with Astronomer session. So today, what we're going to be going through is how you can build and implement data quality checks within Snowflake using Airflow. So we're going to be switching up the format a little more and have it be a bit of a live coding session where I'm going to build the pipeline right in front of your very eyes. So for this example, it's going to be relatively simple. We're just taking a local CSV file and checking for some column values, has the right amount of rows. But the logic here is the important part. You can cut out the local CSV load with your own data ingestion pipeline. And then obviously we're deleting it after, so I can just keep running this pipeline to keep showing it. But in practice, probably wouldn't do that. So what you should really focus on is the middle section where we're actually going to be implementing the data quality checks. And that's where you can bring in your own logic that, let's say you want to check for a number of rows or certain values. That's where you can implement your logic there and make use of these concepts. So data quality, just some, pre specifications for this because we're using a local CSV file. It's considered perfect, immutable. There's no transformations here, and the exact values of the data are known. So just basically giving us some high-level understanding of the data that we're actually processing. So now we've gotten this little primer out of the way, let's start building our DAG. So the first thing we're going to want to do is bring in our libraries. So we're going to bring in a classic Airflow DAG, the chain, so we can just chain different tasks together instead of just rely on bit mapping, the empty operator, which we're just going to use for our start and end. And then these are really the important ones, which is the SQL operators, the SQL column check operator and the SQL table check operator. So this is, as you might have guessed, how we'll actually be implementing these SQL data quality checks. Then, because we're using Snowflake as the platform here, Snowflake Summit in Vegas, if you're going, I'll see you there. So we're using the Snowflake operator to interact with the Snowflake database we'll be using for storing this data while it's undergoing these data quality checks. Then date, time, and task group, just so we can group different tasks. So after we've gotten this out of the way, we are going to define some variables. So the first variable we're going to find is just the forest fire table. So we're taking forest fire data, and that's just kind of the basis for this data quality check. So not really important what the data is here, but just so you know, like if you're using this for your own Snowflake table, this is where you would input that information. And so now we've gotten these base variables out of the way, we can start defining our DAG. So with our DAG definition, we're going to want to just call it simple Snowflake. Then we have a description, just example DAG. We have a markdown format for the documentation. Start date 2021. Schedule interval of none. Template search path. So this is where it's going to be actually looking for the Snowflake or the SQL code that we're going to be using here for our data quality checks. So this is, you would replace this to be wherever your SQL files are being stored. And then we're setting catch up to false because this is just an example DAG. I don't need to catch up all the way from 2021. So we've got the DAG definition out of the way. So now we can start writing some tasks. So the first task we're going to create is just a simple table creation. So we need to have a table that we're actually going to be using to store this forest fire data that we're uploading from the CSV. So we'll create that using the Snowflake operator, give it a task ID of create table, and then we have the include create forest file SQL statement. So this is referencing using Jinja templating the forest fire SQL statement that we've already defined in our SQL statement section. And to show you what one of these would be, we can, actually we don't need to. So now that we've gotten our first task, we've got the table created, let's now insert our data into that Snowflake table. So to create our insert task, we're again just going to be using a Snowflake operator. So we'll define it like this. And so you see very simple load function where we're again just loading that SQL, loading that forest fire data using the SQL statement that we've already predefined. And again, just passing it to that Snowflake forest fire table that we've created within Snowflake. So now we've got the stage set. Now it's time to actually implement our data quality checks. And so the way we're going to do this is as a task group, because we just want to isolate within the pipeline. These are the data quality tasks, but also just makes it easy to pass certain default args like the Snowflake connection ID, and just grouping them together within the Airflow UI. So after we've defined our task group, we can create our first task, which is going to be a SQL column check operator. So bringing it in here. So here we're just running data quality checks on the audit table. So this is checking that forest fire table, are any values equal to 0? And this is checking the ID. So every area that we're checking for forest fires has a certain ID, and they'll never be equal to 0. So we'll drop any 0 IDs from the table, since they're obviously an error. So this is where you would say, if you were implementing this yourself for your columns, if you have some column where you expect there to be null values, this is how you implement a null check to just drop those columns, or just check that, make sure, hey, none of those columns are equal to 0. And then, so now we've checked out our columns, we can check out some data quality on the table level. So here, we'll be looking at the number of rows within the table, and just checking that they equal to 9. We're only looking at 9 different forest fires. It's a relatively small table to make it easy to upload and download, and to run quickly. So really simple here, and this is just, if you're expecting your data to be of a certain length, here you can set that value and verify that it is indeed of that length, of 9. So now that we have defined our data quality checks, we've gone through, we've checked the columns, made sure there's no null values. We have also checked our rows, make sure that there are the exact amount of rows that we expect there to be. So we can delete the table. So this is where, you might be taking this data and moving it into, from a dev or a staging area into your production database. But here we're just going to delete the table because this is not a production database and we need to keep it clean. So here, the delete table statement just look like this. So again, using that Snowflake operator, calling a SQL file that we've already predefined, and then just including the parameters that Snowflake forest fire table, again, using those variables we set at the start of the DAG. So now that we're done with that, we've got our full Snowflake data quality checks implemented. And then we're going to actually add just beginning and end empty operators. I told you they'd be good for something. And here they are. So just setting a beginning and end point where we don't have to immediately start creating tables. We have kind of a begin task that then we can schedule on and trigger the downstream tasks. And then we have a great use case for the chain operator. So this is great if you just have a bunch of tasks that you're going in a straight linear line and you don't want to fuss around with the bit mapping between all of them. You can just create a list or array of all the values, pass them in a chain, and it will just chain them linearly. So that's the DAG. You have a load statement, you're processing it to do some data quality checks, and then deleting it. So this is the area that you'd want to focus on implementing your own data quality checks in practice using the SQL column check operator and the SQL table check operator. So now that we're done here, we can head over to the Airflow UI. Give me a second. Computer. So here, this is where we're just going to go and check out what this actually looks like in the Airflow UI. Give you a nice visual representation and the fact that it will actually work. Everything here we want you to take away and use in practice. So time to prove it. And seeing some live production work right now. There we go. Cool. So now we're in the Airflow UI. As you can see, I've already run it a couple times, and I've also had data quality checks for almost every database out there. So here we're just going to run the SQL one, trigger DAG, and now we can use the new unified task view to monitor our DAG. So here we can see all the task instance details, and then we'll go over to the graph view so you can watch it run in SQL. So this is why we have the data quality checks as a task group, just so we can visualize them within the UI, but also so that they can run in parallel. So column checks and table checks operate at the same time, and then we're deleting that table afterwards. So very simple DAG, but a really extensible DAG for pretty much any use case around data quality in Snowflake. So I really hope you learned something. I know I did putting it together. And if you have any other ideas for topics you'd like to see in this series, you have something you'd really like to watch me go through and discuss, let me know. Hit me a line at george.yates@astronomer.io, and let's start a conversation. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you learned something and have a good one.